Click play and call it work.
Matthew's Thoughts.
Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and welcome to another episode of Matthew's Thoughts, the show that Ashley Perkins asked, is this a show because you just have an extra 20 to 30 minutes to fill? And somebody else replied to that comment saying, I hope it doesn't take up any other slots. Really like how much you guys are liking my show. To answer that question in all seriousness though, it's a show that I really wanted to do. I just like to do reviews, I like to talk about stuff, and this I kind of do it when I have a chance, although my goal is to try to do one or two a week. So far I've been doing a couple a week, although I do them in batches. This next little series is going to cover some of the books from The Beast Arises series that Black Library has been putting out. And this is the saga of a enormous orc invasion from an orc called the Beast, or Slaughter, or whatever you want to call him, into Imperium space, such as never been known before and never will be known since. He makes Gazgul Thraka look like a little snotling and not really consequential whatsoever. And this is post 30K, but I think I honestly, off the top of my head, I don't know exactly when it's happening. I think it's like the 32nd millennia. It's been like 1,000 years since the heresy, I believe, but that doesn't really matter. It's just post-heresy, but it's still back in the early days of the Space Marine chapters and everything like that. So I'm not sure exactly how many videos I'm going to do. I've read the first 3 books, so I'm going to put these aside. We got 3 books right here. The very first one started with Dan Abnett, and each of them is written by a different author. At the time of me filming this, I have read the first 3, I've started the 4th one, and I've got the first 6. They're supposed to be coming out once per month, and I just happened to start it. And I'm not quite sure 2 things. 1, how many videos this is going to take me to review these, but also number 2, I don't know how to do this without really giving spoilers away. Now, I'm going to try my best not to give away like really important plot points that maybe you wouldn't have gathered. Like obviously it's an orc invasion, and so spoiler alert, there are orcs, and it's dealing, if you could read the synopsis online, even just the book synopses on the back can give away some things. But if you don't want any spoilers whatsoever, you just want to launch into it, then I will just give you a quick 30-second review right now of the first 3 books, and then I'll start a more in-depth review of them, which might actually take more than one video. We're just going to play it by ear. I'm just going to talk about it, and if this video goes on long enough, then I'll stop it and we'll do another video separate. So, quick review, spoiler-free, of the first 3 books. The first one is called I Am Slaughter, and it is by Dan Abnett. Now, Dan Abnett, of course, being a very solid Black Library author. I loved this book. It was incredibly entertaining. The way he writes action is incredible, and you really felt what was going on in there. And I'm being cryptic on purpose because I don't want to give any spoilers. So the first book, I read through it. These are all fast reads, by the way. Like, they're 12 books. They're not quite novellas, but they're, how many pages are they each? They're all roughly about the same, a little over 200 pages each. I think I read this one in a matter of a couple of days, which is like here and there. So if you're a fast reader, you can get through them relatively quickly. And I like that. I enjoyed that. Knowing it's 12 books, I know there's going to be cliffhangers. That normally bothers me in trilogies where I have to wait a long time for the next one. I prefer a book to kind of be able to tell its own story, even if it's part of a larger series. And I don't mind it interlinking storylines with the future books, but it really bothers me when it just kind of ends without resolving anything whatsoever. Well, I Am Slaughter actually does a pretty good job of resolving the first part, even though it does end on an obvious cliffhanger. And so, but I can kind of forgive it a bit more with these books because of how quick they are. So I loved I Am Slaughter. The second book is called Predator Prey by Rob Sanders. The first half of the book I found to be kind of drawn out and rather boring. And I don't want to say all the reasons why. I'll tell you in the long version of this. But basically the first half was kind of boring. It was well written. There was nothing wrong with that. It's just what was going on, once again being cryptic, made it a little more boring. And the last half, it picked up and it got really interesting, including some politicking and just some of the characters that you do. And finally, I just finished reading this one yesterday, or the day before, I can't remember. The Emperor, it's this morning actually, I just finished reading it. The Emperor Expects by Gav Thorpe, another solid Black Library writer. And I really enjoyed this almost as much as the first one. Not quite as, the first one was just so fabulous that it's hard to compare, but Dan Abnett is really good that way. But I really enjoyed this third one. It had a good pace to it, the characters were good, and it was interesting. And now I've just started this one, literally just the first chapter, so I have nothing to say there. So that is the end of my spoiler-free review of the first 3 books. I know you didn't really get to hear much except how much I liked it. Now, if you want a bit of background, I've read a lot of Black Library books. My favorites have been things like Ravener, the Gaunt's Ghost series has been awesome. Sandy Mitchell's Caiaphas Cain, the first book, I thought that was hilarious. It was great. And so compared to those, there's been some that I've read that haven't been so great as well. And compared to those, I'd say that the first one of these in the series, definitely a solid comparison. I probably can't say I enjoyed it quite as much as the Gaunt's Ghost and Ravener, but it's quite up there. And then the second one, it kind of dipped down and then got interesting again. The third one is picking back up again. So there. This is where you leave if you do not want spoilers. I'm not going to tell the entire story, but just I want to talk about it more freely, and that might involve giving away some of the plot points. Like I said, you can spoil this for yourself just by reading the backs of each of the books and seeing what happens. But I just need to talk about it. So you've been warned. Spoiler-free zone has been exited. So going back to the first book, I Am Slaughter. Now the reason it's called this has a wonderful play. There is one of the Marines. He is a captain, and his name is Corland, Captain Corland, but they all have their wall names. He's Imperial Fist. It's all about Imperial Fist here. And his wall name is Slaughter, so he's actually Captain Slaughter. Think about that for a second. The 40K Rejects, if you're familiar with them at all, here's Captain Slaughter, except he's not Chaos, and he's not chaotically whatever you want to call Captain Slaughter. He is his own man. He's awesome. And this tells the tale of the Space Marines and the Imperium facing a bit of a threat called the Chromes. They're kind of like an insectoid race, kind of Tyranid-like. They're definitely not the Tyranids unless they've really stretched the fluff of the Tyranids. But they've been finding these insect race all over these planets, and it's really strange. The Adeptus Mechanicus are really interested in studying these because they don't have any technology. And so they don't know how this one species can be on dozens of worlds, on all these worlds, because the species doesn't, as far as they can see, have no spaceships, have no technology, not any high level of intelligence. And to see a species on more than one planet, it assumes that it's transported there. And it's not like it evolved there and that they just happened to be seeing like maybe somebody else brought it there. It actually is a relatively newcomer to all these different planets. And so the Imperial Fists are fighting on one of the planets. I think it was called like Artementua or something. The names don't stick in my head very well, but they're on this planet and they're just killing billions of these things. There's a ton of politics back on Terra, which at first I found a little boring, but now that I've gotten into it, it's really, really interesting. It's rather frustrating actually to see the High Lords of Terra just not getting anything done because they're all so busy. But there is one character in particular, the Grand Master of the Assassins, Vangorich, I think is how you pronounce his name, and he's particularly interesting because he's trying to kind of get the High Lords into order, but not like directly, but indirectly, even considering assassinating some of them. And so through the politics of the High Lords, the entire Imperial Fist chapter, not the Legion, remember the Legion's been broken up into chapters at this time, is all sent to this one world to deal with these Chromes, to just have like this decisive blow. This ends up actually, big spoiler alert here, being the end of the Imperial Fist because of the arrival of the Orcs, which doesn't happen until the end. So there's an awesome action throughout the entire thing, but the Orcs don't really play until the very, very end. Now they actually are playing throughout the whole thing, but it's just great. The action of them fighting the Chromes, the mystery behind why the Chromes are there, and that I'm going to kind of leave that for you to find out as you read. I know I've already given some stuff away, and like I said, it's kind of hard not to talk about it without really talking about why I like the book. But the way Dan Abnett describes the fighting between the Imperial Fist and the Chromes is you feel like you're there. And then the Adeptus Mechanicus are kind of along for the ride, and they're trying to learn about the Chromes and try to find out why they're there, and find out what about this bigger threat that starts to happen while they're there, that ends up destroying the Imperial Fists. And then it all culminates at the very end. And at that point, I want to kind of leave and let you kind of read that for the first time yourself, because I thought the thing that happens at the end, as the whole thing they're building up to, was so well described that I felt this newfound respect for orcs for one thing. And I always find that books do that. Like you read about the races and their codices, And they give a very black and white impression of what these races are supposed to be like. Like orcs are this way, and Imperial Guard are this way, Space Marines are this way. But then the books allow you to kind of realize that, for the norm, there's going to be huge deviations around that norm. And of course, the Codex can only cover so much. Really, we're talking about a galaxy's worth of things, and so there's going to be more variety than just the handful of Codex entries that you find in your book. And so you get to see that in the Space Marines themselves, and you also get to see that in the orcs. You get to see a new race, the Chromes. You get to see it in the Adeptus Mechanicus. You get to see it in the infighting and the High Lords of Terra. And it is all actually really interesting. I remember when I finished this book, it left me with such a cool feeling, even though it left on a cliffhanger, I will tell you that right now, which I knew it would because I knew there's 12 books, and so they can't finish a story in the first one. But I just loved it. I felt like I was there, and I could really imagine. It kind of reminded me the Batman vs. Superman movie, which I'm not a big fan of just because of how much stuff they squashed into it. But one thing I loved about that movie was the opening sequence where you got to see the fight of Superman from the previous Superman movie where they're destroying the city, but you got to see it from, in this case, Bruce Wayne's perspective, but along the streets. And I really appreciated that because I actually hated that fight in the Superman movie. I thought it went on too long and it was a little overdramatic. But when you got to see it from the people's view on the ground, it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. It wasn't just buildings falling anymore. It was people getting crushed. It was people dying and looking up and seeing basically these gods fighting each other. And it really, that first part of the movie was probably my favorite because I actually felt like, whoa, this is what it would feel like to be in the middle of a city as Superman battled another Superman and just destroyed half the city. This is what it would feel like. It evoked those emotions. Well, Dan Abnett does the same thing in I Am Slaughter. I could feel what it'd be like to be an Imperial Fist. And you'd think that Space Marines would be boring to talk about. Thankfully, I already knew that wasn't the case, having read some of the Horus Heresy books. But I had started off with Ravener, so that's about Inquisition and his warband, or his retinue, sorry. I had read Gaunt's Ghost, which is just about Imperial Guard guys, just regular guys. I remember in one part they come across one Chaos Space Marine, and it takes like a ton of them to take one of them down. So it feels like Space Marines would be kind of one-dimensional and boring to read about, but Dan Abnett does a really good job with that. And the Horus Heresy also shows that too, with some of the other authors. So there is more variety to them than just, I shall know no fear, and that is it. Oh, look, there's a door, and it's locked. I must punch it open. Oh, there's a person that I must get information from. I must just shake it from them. Like there's more to them than that, even though there is that stereotype, and it's there for a reason. So great read right there. And we definitely have time for me to cover at least the second one. I'm going to try to cover all three of them in this one. So the second one is called Predator Prey by Rob Sanders. And like I said, I don't want to give away the ending of the first book, but basically in the second book, the orc invasion is on its way. That does give away certain things, but like I said, this is not spoiler free. There's certain moments I don't want you to miss by reading this, so let's just leave it at that. And the problem is the first half of the book, it feels like each chapter is them is a different world and a different story of a different group of people who are trying to escape or survive or fight back or do something special to combat the orcs, or maybe not even. Maybe they're just dying. And so for that first half of the book, I keep thinking, well, maybe all these stories are going to link up, and heck, maybe some of them will come back in a later book. But in the meantime, I'm being assaulted with just so many new names of places and people. And there was even one person who I was sure was going to be an important character because of certain details that they gave that character, which you normally only give somebody that you're trying to get the audience to attach onto. But by the end of the book, that certain character was dead. And what they had done did some damage to the orcs, but in the end, with the scale of the invasion, it seemed kind of inconsequential to the entire story. And so it was like he wrapped up that storyline, but it seemed like such a small storyline in the book to be the thing that was wrapped up. See, I think that each of these books should start and finish a specific storyline. In the meantime, continuing an overarching storyline and maybe starting new side ones. We've got 12 books to develop, so why not? That's 2,400 pages plus, probably more like 2,500 pages. That's the size of like 3 rather large books. I don't know how big Lord of the Rings is, but there's a lot of room in there to develop lots of different stories. But if you're going to break them up into books like this, you need to have a satisfying beginning and ending, especially if the audience has to wait for the next book for another month. You want them to be satisfied with the previous one, not just like, It just felt like it ended in the middle of a sentence. So the first half just kind of took forever to take off, and then they kind of gained a bit more momentum near the end. It came back to the politicking of the High Lords of Terra, and well, let's just open to a random page, see if it jogs my memory of anything. I just read this the other day, but there's just so many names and so many details. Yeah, see. Oh yes, and it tells the story of the Fifth Exemplar, which is an Imperial Fist successor chapter. So they're in there as well. There's just so many things jam-packed into this one book that I feel like he could have left out a lot of them and just expanded on certain ones, or like started a story and finished it. And so I just found myself kind of bored. I almost put it down and didn't pick it back up for a little while. But then I was like, no, I want to get through it because the first book was so good. I want to try to get through the series. I also wanted to make reviews on it, and so that was a part of my motivation of finishing it. And thankfully I did. The story got more interesting by the end. And but this one felt like it ended in the middle of a sentence, and so it didn't really feel like it completed anything. It just kind of, the story's going, and book ends, and without any real reason and real cutoff. Like a chapter ending in the middle of a sentence, that's okay because you can pick it up later. And I don't mean literally in the middle of a sentence. I mean that it just feels like it just didn't finish what it was meant to finish in that book. So Predator Prey was good by the end, but the first half just spent too much time giving me too many details of different people. Maybe that'll come back, but the problem is because of the number of details they gave me, I won't even probably recognize half of them in the following books. And so I just can't see that. Thankfully, the third book is an improvement, and it does pick up. And I want to go back to, if I don't think Rob Sanders is going to watch this video, but if he does, the writing was great. It's not that, and maybe it was the role he was forced to play in the second book, and maybe the story was kind of preset for everybody, and they're just writing it. It would have been a big task to unite all these authors to do this 12-part series. I know that Horus Heresy was kind of is rather large project as well, but that one feels like there's a lot of side things that they can kind of go and they can write about, and they're almost independent of each other. But this one had to interlink all throughout the whole thing. So I'm not sure if it's 12 different authors, or if some of them will reprise. I'd love to see Dan Abnett come back and do another one, hopefully, but I'm not sure. I know they probably are all written and everything. So the writing was good, the dialogue was solid, the action was okay. Although I do remember the first half, the action with the orcs seemed rather drab compared to the action I read in the I Am Slaughter one. So thankfully it's a quick read. So even if you're not even if you only give it like a 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 kind of thing, you can still get through it relatively quickly so that you can then continue the story. So that's just like any series you watch on TV, for example. There might be episodes that are less fun and awesome than others, but it doesn't stop you from reading them because you enjoy the series overall. I think that's how this book feels. Then we get to The Emperor Expects, and this is a Gav Thorpe one. And this one details a major naval engagement, huge naval engagement between the Imperial Navy and the orcs at Port Sanctus, which is a shipyard of the Imperial Guard. And it takes a long time. Like the entire book basically goes from beginning to end of that, which I appreciate because it kind of starts off leading up to them going to this huge engagement. There's all sorts of politics, which in this case I really enjoyed because it's just, I think in some ways it's accurate. Often we see movies or we read books where you have these enormous bureaucratic engines of galactic size proportions, or at least quadrant size like in Star Trek, or galaxy wide like in Star Wars. And everything always seems to run well, even though we know that on Earth, which is a one planet size thing, we've got hundreds of countries, all with their own government, and even within those countries there's divisions on how the government should be run, and that bureaucratic nightmare can make things kind of slow down. I know at least in Canada that with the way we keep going back from liberal to conservative, each one undoing what the previous one did, trying to do something different, that definitely slows down progress when it comes to certain things. And also it also is, there's checks and balances in place. I don't want this to turn into a Matthew's thoughts on Canadian politics, but I've just witnessed that. All I'm trying to say is in a country with 35 million people, I've seen that bureaucratic nightmare slow things down. But I can only imagine, actually I can't even imagine, what running a galaxy-wide empire, even if you're not in 100% of the planets, even if you're just in 1% of the planets, of the just the billions and billions and billions and billions of worlds, the bureaucratic nightmare would be hard. It would be impossible to overcome. And so it's funny that they kind of show all of this as separated, like the High Lords and the admirals. They see threats, but at the same time, it's hard for them to kind of register them as real threats until it's right in their face, because they're so used to dealing with things in such an abstract manner. Well, this one deals with a lot of that, but in the end, he gets his hands dirty with a really cool engagement, and it makes me want to play Battlefleet Gothic, which I'm sure some of you would love, and recreate some of these as they attack one of the Orcs' attack moons, one of their Death Stars, at Port Sanctus. And I won't tell you the outcome of the battle. All I can say is that Gav Thorpe did a great job in depicting a naval engagement, which was the majority of the fight was ships to ships. And it was great. It was really well done. It alternated between that story and something happening back on Terra, which I thought gave it a nice rhythm. And I was very pleased that the book finished the fight. So this could almost be called, it's called The Emperor Expects, but it could have been called The Battle of Port Sanctus. And instead they go for something more cryptic like The Emperor. I'm not even sure why this one's called Predator Prey, because orcs are the predator and we're the prey. And it outlines a lot of worlds dropping, but I don't know. I Am Slaughter made sense for more than one reason, and some I won't even talk about here because I don't want to give away too much. But The Emperor Expects tells us nothing about what the book is actually about. Even this picture on the front, I'm still not quite sure who that's supposed to be, and I'm sure somebody can tell me in the comments, because he's got a plasma pistol, and none of the ones that I read about had a plasma pistol. They're all bolt pistols or something else, as far as I remember. But did a great job with it, wrapped it up in the end. This is the Battle of Port Sanctus, with some cool stuff going back on at Terra to build up, and it has a walloping ending, which I really, really loved. And then the fourth book picks right up from, which I also enjoy. I know some of the books are probably going to all of a sudden jump away. One thing I hate, this is one of the reasons I don't like when books finish their thought, is because often what happens when you start another book is that it's like, meanwhile, all the way over here, or let's back up a few years and tell you a prequel. And it's like, no, just continue the thing I was interested in learning more about. And thankfully, book 4 picks up right off where it left. I don't know beyond chapter 1 if it's going to continue that. But I enjoy the fact that it just right off the bat gets right into it. I know some of the other books, like we've got some interesting pictures on here, like this one has a picture of an Eldar. And so I know that they're going to get involved somehow. But I've stopped reading the synopses for these because I don't want anything given away. I don't enjoy spoilers as much as I've been giving you tons of them here. But I warned you. So that's my impression. So I guess we got all 3 of them done in this Matthew's Thoughts. Let me know what you think about these books if you've read them. Also, let me know what other stuff you'd like me to review. I know I've gotten lots of suggestions so far, and I will look at the suggestions and I'll do some of those. I can't do all of them, obviously. And a lot of times I'm just going to do some stuff that I want to do as well. Just it happens to be whatever I'm working on. That's the brilliance of this show, if I can say brilliance, is that it doesn't require me to go out and do research because it's based off of what I'm doing. So I'm reading these. Doing the chapter or the Space Marine stuff overviews, that was based off of battle reports that I played. And so this is me taking kind of what I'm being exposed to and then talking to you guys about that. So sometimes that's kind of what dictates a little bit, but I'd love to hear what you guys would like me to cover, and then the things that it can overlap I can definitely do. So stay tuned for more reviews. Let me know if you want more reviews for sure of the rest of these books as they come out and as I read them, and I'll be sure to do those. Thanks for watching. Happy wargaming.